Law school applications are surging right now. This is the biggest increase in about 15 years. I saw the same thing happen back in 2008. Applications spiked, law schools filled their seats and took people's money, and then the bottom fell out. Graduates could not find jobs. They were six figures in debt with no path forward, and I'm worried that a lot of you might be falling into the exact same trap. I've been teaching the LSAT for over 20 years now, and I've watched these cycles play out time and time again. And what concerns me about this particular spike is not that applications are up, but it's why they're up. Almost nobody is talking about the one factor that actually is driving most of this surge, and it's got nothing to do with politics. I'm going to break down the numbers, the real cause, and three scenarios that are about to play out depending on what happens with the economy. And the third one is the one that should probably worry you. But first, the numbers. LSAC reported early in the 2026 cycle that applicants were up 33% year over year. Applications were up 27% year over year. And of course, early cycle data is kind of noisy. But as more numbers came in through November and December, the trend held up. Applications still up over 20%, applicants up nearly 25%, and that's not a blip. 179 law schools saw increases in applicant numbers, only 16 saw decreases. The Mountain West region was up 46%, New England was up 27%. Applicants scoring in the 175 to 180 range on the LSAT are up 25%, meaning the pool is bigger and it's also stronger. And so if you're applying to law school right now, you are competing against more people who are bringing higher scores. And of course, the schools are seeing those higher numbers and they're acting on them. And most of the coverage in the mainstream media points to politics as the driver. One survey found 56% of admissions officers saying the political environment was the major driver. And of course, yes, every politically charged moment pushes law school applications up. It happened in 2016 and again in 2020. Same thing's happening now. But politics is not the main story. Economists are using the term rolling recession to describe what's happening right now because some parts of the economy are fine, others not so much. Now, the parts that are struggling happen to be the industries that hire the most college graduates. Tech, of course, has pulled back on hiring significantly, so have finance, professional services, and consulting. And the data backs this up. The New York Fed reported that unemployment for recent college graduates aged 22 to 27 hit 5.7% at the end of 2025, highest since 2013, outside the pandemic. And of course, the underemployment number is worse. That measures graduates who have jobs, but jobs that don't require a college degree. That number hit 42.5%, meaning nearly half of recent college graduates are working in roles they didn't need their degree for. And so 4 years of college, graduating with debt, a diploma, and a coin flip chance, you end up in a job that doesn't use any of it. Now, Goldman Sachs found that from 2023 to 2025, industries that primarily hire college graduates were losing an average of 9,000 jobs per month. Not gaining, but losing. The industries that hire workers without degrees were still adding jobs during that same period. And so you've got a 22-year-old with a poli-sci degree that can't get hired. A 25-year-old laid off from a tech company isn't getting callbacks. And so where do they go? They go to grad school. And for a huge number of them, they're going to law school. So the job market is actually the biggest single factor behind this employment surge. It's the factor most media coverage is underplaying, and it should concern you because when people go to law school to escape a bad economy, rather than because they want to practice law, bad things happen. We saw that happen after 2008, and I'm going to come back to that because the job market is not the only force at work. There are several different things converging, which is why this cycle looks so extreme. Of course, artificial intelligence is reshaping white-collar work, and so a lot of young professionals are looking at law as a career that feels more durable. Of course, whether that's true is a second question, but the perception is still changing behavior anyway. And so a lot of folks are reapplying to law school. Last cycle was already pretty brutal, and a lot of qualified people either didn't get in or they held off on applying when they saw the numbers, and they're back this cycle adding volume on top of new applicant growth. And of course, the LSAT testing pipeline keeps growing as well. August 2025 had about 26,000 test takers, up about 18% from the year before, and up nearly 60% from 2 years ago. September LSAT takers were up 24%, October test takers up 16%. And so when LSAT testing volume runs that high, application volume is going to follow within months. And so a bad job market for graduates, political energy driving interest in law, anxiety about AI replacing white-collar jobs, a backlog of reapplicants from last cycle, and a growing test taker pipeline all hitting at once. That's why the numbers look the way they do. Now, a lot of people are asking me what happens if we hit a full-on recession, a broad-based economic downturn. And of course, I'm not predicting a recession. I'm not an economist, but the question keeps coming up. And I think you got to understand what history tells us. There are three different potential scenarios that could play out. Scenario one is no recession. Let's say the economy stabilizes, geopolitical tensions ease up, applicant numbers probably flatten, things are still competitive, still elevated, but the growth stops accelerating. That's probably your best case scenario if you're applying to law school in the next couple of years. Scenario number two, a short-term recession where we have a few months of contraction, maybe for a quarter or two. If that happens, you can expect another spike in applications on top of what we're already seeing, where people lose jobs, grad school becomes the default. That's what happens every single time. And so in that scenario, the current surge gets even bigger. Then scenario three, a prolonged recession, and that would be the most impactful scenario. If we follow the same pattern as the Great Recession, you get an initial spike, just like we saw in 2008 and 2009, when applications surged because people were running away from a terrible job market. And so law schools filled their seats. But then the floor dropped out. After 2010, law school applications fell every single year for 5 straight years. By 2013, they were down over 13% year over year. That is a free fall scenario. The people who had enrolled during the spike graduated into a legal market that had also contracted. So they borrowed money to escape one bad economy and walked right into another one. Only 44% of Great Recession law grads said they had a good job waiting at graduation. A quarter said it took more than a year to find one, and 60% had borrowed over $100,000. Meanwhile, law schools raised tuition nearly 30% between 2008 and 2015. Prices went up during a collapse in demand, and so student debt spiked over 50%. Now, nobody talks about this part during spike. During the surge, all the conversation is about how hard it is to get in. Nobody asks what happens to the people who get in at the wrong time. And so the question is, are we in the early phase of another one of these cycles? Now, I don't know. Of course, I hope we don't. But the sooner things stabilize geopolitically, the less likely it becomes. But if you're about to make a 6-figure decision about your future, you've got to know the history. And so what do? If you are applying this cycle, you've got to know what you're walking into. Schools have a deeper and stronger applicant pool than they have had in 20 years. Some law schools are using the demand to reduce scholarship offers. But despite that, your LSAT score will still carry more weight now than it has in a very long time, and it's the #1 tool you have in your arsenal. And so if your LSAT score is below where you want it to be, I would seriously encourage you to consider retaking the LSAT before you apply, because if you have a below median score in this cycle, it's an especially bad move. If you could wait one more cycle to retake, it's almost always better. Now, if you're thinking about law school mainly because you can't find a job, of course, I understand the impulse, but you want to make sure you're choosing law school because you actually want to practice law. The people who got hurt worst after the Great Recession were the ones who enrolled during the spike for the wrong reasons. They didn't want to be lawyers. They just wanted to not be unemployed. But those are very different motivations. And 3 years later, that difference showed up in their outcomes. So right now, we're probably in scenario 1 or the early stages of scenario 2. But if the economy shifts, we could be looking at something bigger. And so the decisions you make in the next 6 to 12 months about whether to apply, where to apply, how much debt to take on, those will play out over the rest of your career.